Hey everybody, Eric Hayden here in the garden. Garden's starting to slow down as we get into the month of October. Even here in the south, we're starting to cool off, and at the very least, our days are certainly getting shorter. I'm sure you've noticed that with the shadows in your yard and getting dark sooner. So the garden behind me is slowing down, but this is kind of the second peak of blooms for most of the country. And what I mean by that is traditionally roses grow really well with temperatures in the 70s and 80s during the day, 50s and 60s at night. So that's why rose shows are typically in the spring and fall. So no matter where you live, those tend to be the best blooms of the year. We have blooms here in the summertime, but when it's 90 degrees out and super humid, they just don't do that well. This video, we're going to show you an update in the garden. I have some fantastic blooms behind me. But before we get to that, I want to talk about don't get discouraged when you do have disease in your garden or insects. A lot of people think that roses are hard to grow, and they can be a challenge, but they're very rewarding and they're very tough. A lot of people think you have to have perfection in the garden, and that's just not the case. So if you saw some of my videos before, I had a pretty bad outbreak of black spot. Most of the summer was dry. I was spraying regularly and things were looking pretty good. And we had about a 6-week period where it didn't rain that much. So I got a little lax in my spraying. Then it started raining, and a lot of that rain fell at night. So we had a pretty bad black spot outbreak. It's kind of embarrassing doing these videos. I don't know if you noticed, but some of my bushes were almost completely bare, absent of leaves because the black spot was so bad. So I did some videos where I showed you about blowing the leaf litter out of the garden so that you weren't promoting more disease down the road. And I did prune back a little bit, not so much for the black spot, but it was fall, so it's a good time to prune. So I'm going to show you some of the results of that with the pruning and just the recovery of the bushes. Notice all these purple leaves on top. That's all new growth. Again, you don't want to have to put your plant through this, but it will recover. I got some black spot old leaves down there still, so we're not completely out of the woods yet. But notice the recovery. Some of that is because the plant lost leaves and it's regenerating growth, and some of it's because I did my normal fall pruning. This was another bush that was pretty ravaged with black spot. This is silver cream. Again, look at all that new lush growth. So the point of this is, if you got black spot in the garden, I know we're getting late in the season and this might be more applicable for next year. Remove the leaves if you can, spray them, but don't get discouraged. Even if you have to prune them down a little bit, they will recover, and look at all this tremendous new growth, healthy leaves. So don't get too discouraged. I mentioned I pruned. I didn't do that for black spot only. You can, cut away the diseased leaves or pull them off. That can certainly help. But in the spring and in the fall, it's usually two good times to prune, and it can stimulate growth. These roses were quite tall, so I really didn't want to prune them because they were looking pretty good outside of the black spot. But take this Mr. Lincoln, for example. It was already tall. I took maybe a third off, and we did a video on that. All that purple you see on top is healthy new growth. So as you prune, you might think, wow, this is really being harsh to the bush, but overall it's actually going to generate growth for down the road. And I can't show you a better example than this bush. Not only are all the purple leaves new growth, notice where these healthy, sturdy, big canes are emanating from. They're emanating from where you pruned. So here's my cut. And usually just cutting it is fine. We do try to prune above an outside bud, and you can see the reason why. If I had done that on this, this cane would be going out from the center of the bush instead of in. But I'm not too picky when it's outside of rose season. But nonetheless, above a bud eye, you get a healthy new cane. And if you prune especially sturdier canes, at least a pencil in width, you're going to get a strong cane coming out of it. Very, very nice. And look at that. I mean, that's a tremendously long cane with one bloom or bud on top that will be good to go in about 3 weeks. Some of the smaller canes, it's probably just better to prune away. And I didn't do this because we're not in show season. But here's an example of a very, very thin cane. If I was in show season, I would just kind of take that whole cane away. It's kind of useless in the sense of big blooms and big canes. It's small, and then notice how short and spindly the growth is off of that. So if you want to get fancy with your pruning, if you stick to the thicker pencil width or larger canes, that will develop big ones down the road. The rest you can kind of take all the way back down to the bush itself, either the bud union or just clear it out. I did not do that this year. I just pruned normally, and you can see all the top growth. But the whole point of the last two points are we had tremendous black spot. We started spraying, stuck with the course, didn't get discouraged, did our normal fall pruning, and now we're being rewarded with growth and blooms. Some of these are just fantastic. This is Mr. Lincoln. It's one of my most recommended roses. It was one of the more disease-resistant roses in the garden. Did it get some black spot? Yes, but not as much as some of the others. One that's a little shorter, but decent growth habit is Dolly Parton, and it's just a great fragrance as well. The thing I like about this bloom, it's an orangish red, and it's very, very large. Compared to Mr. Lincoln, the blooms are a little bit bigger, and they hold a little longer. Mr. Lincoln's blooms kind of open up and fall apart, whereas you can see some of these have been on the bush for a while and the petals are staying on them as well. I'll show you a couple more blooms before we wrap this video up. You'll notice another thing, certain roses do better during certain parts of the year. Alina likes cooler weather. I did really well with this, winning multiple kings of the Rose Show, which is second place up in New York. Not often a queen, but a lot of kings. You can see the bee likes it as well. But just a beautiful bloom. It's a yellow. It does better in cooler weather. So traditionally in the Pacific Northwest, over toward upstate New York, where you have a lot of summer weather in the 80s, lows in the 50s and 60s, it does quite well. Here in the South, it will tend to do well early in the spring and again in the fall, but it doesn't get much better than that. The downside here is I do have some issues with thrips. Those are the brown marks, but look at the pinpoint center on that, and the spiral has a very good growth habit as well. This rose here, Yolande de Aragon, very fragrant. My son likes it, and that's why we're keeping it. It primarily only blooms in the spring. This is the third, yes, third bloom in the fall. However, I'm going to cut this for him. The fragrance cannot be beat. It's outstanding. I keep it because of the fragrance, and also my son likes it. So the point on this, again, you're getting into the peak bloom. You're going to start to notice some nice blooms depending where you are, if it's still cool out or cooling down in the south. This is Folklore, just another really, really nice bloom. It's an orange. This is a Cortez rose, so it tends to do better up north. It does well in the colder climates. It can make it through the winter. The thing I like about this is, again, it depends on the climate how certain varieties do. Let Freedom Ring, Veterans Honor, kicks butt all summer here. Blooms might be a little smaller in the peak heating, but overall the heat doesn't impact it at all. This rose, Folklore, didn't really look good all summer. Terrible in the heat. I almost said, why am I growing this? Well, this is why I'm growing it. Look at it now. Pinpoint center, a spiral, and it's just a gorgeous rose. A very, very good growth habit as well. This is a sport of Folklore, European Touch, so it's more of an apricot color. So far so good. I want to reiterate, if you do have some black spot, I still have some. It's not all lost. Here's another newer rose. This is Eddie Edwards. Let me get out of the shade so you can see the beautiful coloring on that. Let me see if I can get away from shading it as much. It looks a lot more vibrant in the sunshine. So a nice pink blend there, very, very nice with that. And in the background, this is not growing as well. It's not known for its growth. It's an older rose, quote unquote, in terms of exhibition. That's Signature. Very nice as well. You can see the growth habit on most of them. Let Freedom Ring, Affirm, looking really, really good. And some of these I pruned back, but you can see the second layer of growth. Here's where the original height was, and then boom, this is up over 8.5 feet tall. This is Marlin's Day, which is sport of Moonstone. One more bloom caught my eye that I want to share with you before we wrap this video up. This is Let Freedom Ring. Again, there's certain roses that just hold no matter what the weather is. That is a beautiful red rose. very, very nice. So again, this garden about 4 weeks ago looked terrible. We still have some black spot. We sprayed, we removed the infected weeds, not the weeds, the leaves. We removed the affected leaves that had some black spot on them, and now they've recovered quite nicely. You can see the beautiful leaves on Crescendo. So don't get discouraged. These roses are very, very tough. You might think they're hard to grow. They just take a lot of consistent care. If you slip up, if black spot gets a hold of them, or powdery mildew or insects, just get back on your spraying routine, get back on your schedule, and they will make a recovery quite nicely. I'll leave you with these. Again, Alina really recommend, especially for those areas that don't have thrips. It just kind of makes the bloom not look the best, but look at all these blooms and more buds on the way, and behind it is Mr. Lincoln. Hope everyone's doing well. I appreciate the new subscribers. Please comment below. This is a community for sharing, and I share everything, not just the pretty roses, but my mistakes when I get black spot, because we want to be honest with each other. It's a challenge growing roses, especially during certain parts of the year. And being honest shows that while your garden may not look perfect, you cannot beat a fresh cut rose. I'll say it over and over again. You take that Let Freedom Ring that I showed you, you take this Folklore, you combine it with Alina, a couple Dolly Partons and a Mr. Lincoln for fragrance, you give that to a neighbor. You give that to a neighbor, there's nothing at a flower shop that can beat that. Nothing. It's a homegrown rose, much like the taste of a homegrown tomato in the middle of the summer versus something you would get in the wintertime at the grocery store. Hope all is well. Hope everyone's staying healthy. Remember to get outside. Enjoy your garden. It's one of the things we can do safely during this crazy year that's upon us. Get out there, enjoy the nice hobby of growing roses. Have a great one, everybody.